Hi, this is Remembering the Past, the show where we talk about people who've died recently who've had a profound effect on our history, our society, or our culture. And in our ongoing series of Medal of Honor winners, tonight we're going to talk about Lt.Col Joe Jackson, who died recently at the age of 86. Lt.Col Jackson was awarded his Medal of Honor in January of 1969. He was a member of the Air Force, and he was awarded his medal for his bravery at the Battle of Kham Duc on May 12, 1968. The Battle of Kham Duc was one of the worst American defeats of the Vietnam War. It's little known today. In early 1968, the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong launched the Tet Offensive with attacks all over South Vietnam during the Lunar New Year of Tet. Although they suffered military defeats virtually everywhere, it was a strategic success because when it was reported back to the United States, it indicated that the American Army did not have control of South Vietnam as had been reported in the past. And we discussed that when we did the General von Nguyen Giap podcast, which I refer you to. What was even less reported was that after regrouping in the spring of 1968, the North Vietnamese Army launched a second Tet Offensive across South Vietnam. This included the Battle of Khe Sanh, where there was a siege of American forces but a successful rescue operation. In May of 1968, attention turned toward Kham Duc in western central South Vietnam, only miles from the Ho Chi Minh Trail in Laos. The United States had a Special Forces brigade there to reconnoiter the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and since the arrival of United States forces in Vietnam, some of the largest and most stubborn battles had begun as contests for control of Special Forces camps such as this. Kham Duc appeared likely to be the next such battleground, with powerful enemy forces converging on the base, U.S. reinforcements arriving, and support and strike aircraft being summoned to aid the defenders. Unfortunately, the 2nd Division of the North Vietnamese Army, along with a battalion of the Viet Cong, overran a battalion task force of the American Division consisting of the 2nd Battalion, 1st Infantry, and some supporting artillery. At that point, American forces had to withdraw. It was a staggering defeat, considered a disaster by General Creighton Abrams, because it was essentially the last major Special Forces camp we had near the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and evacuations had to be carried out quickly. This is where Lt.Col Jackson earned his Medal of Honor. His citation at the Congressional Medal of Honor website reads as follows. Joe Jackson, rank Lieutenant Colonel, Company 311th Air Commando Squadron, date of issue 1/16/69, place date Kham Duc, Republic of Vietnam, 12 May 1968, organization U.S. Air Force. For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty, Lt.Col Jackson distinguished himself as the pilot of a C-123 aircraft. Lt.Col Jackson volunteered to attempt the rescue of a 3-man USAF combat control team from the Special Forces camp at Kham Duc. Hostile forces had overrun the forward outpost and established gun positions on the airstrip. They were raking the camp with small arms, mortar, light and heavy automatic weapons, and recoilless rifle fire. The camp was engulfed in flames, and ammunition dumps were continuously exploding and littering the runway with debris. In addition, 8 aircraft had been destroyed by the intense enemy fire, and 1 aircraft remained on the runway, reducing its usable length to only 2,200 feet. To further complicate the landing, the weather was deteriorating rapidly, thereby permitting only 1 airstrike prior to his landing. Although fully aware of the extreme danger and likely failure of such an attempt, Lt.Col Jackson elected to land his aircraft and attempt to rescue. Displaying superb airmanship and extraordinary heroism, he landed his aircraft near the point where the combat control team was reported to be hiding. While on the ground, his aircraft was the target of intense hostile fire. A rocket landed in front of the nose of the aircraft but failed to explode. Once the combat control team was aboard, Lt.Col Jackson succeeded in getting airborne despite the hostile fire directed across the runway in front of his aircraft. Lt.Col Jackson's profound concern for his fellow men at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty are in keeping with the highest traditions of the United States Air Force and reflect great credit upon himself and the armed forces of his country. Here is Lt.Col Jackson telling his own story.
My name is Joe Jackson. I was in the United States Air Force and I retired as a colonel. I decided to go into service to learn a profession. All my life I wanted to be an airplane mechanic, so I enlisted in the Army Air Corps in March of 1941. One day a friend of mine was supposed to fly as a flight engineer on a B-25, and he came to me and he said, "I don't feel well. Would you take my flight?" And I said, "Sure." So during the flight, the right engine caught fire, and the pilot turned around and asked me what I wanted him to do for the fire, and I said, "Will you feather the engine?" When he did that, the fire went out. So I got to thinking about it, and I said, "Well, if that guy don't know what to do when you get an engine fire, I know what to do to get when you get an engine fire. So I'm just as smart as he is. I'm going to go to aviation cadet training." So that's what I did.
Lieutenant Colonel Joe M. Jackson officially became a pilot in April of 1943. He spent the rest of World War II as a gunnery instructor, then flew 107 missions as an F-84 fighter pilot during the Korean War. In 1968, at the age of 45, he volunteered to go to Vietnam, where he flew a C-123 light transport plane as a commander in the 311th Air Commando Squadron. On May 12, 1968, Lieutenant Colonel Jackson was engaged in a routine resupply mission near the demilitarized zone.
I wasn't scheduled for anything unusual that day. I was supposed to fly a normal routine cargo mission. But when I got to Chu Lai, I got a recall to return to Da Nang for a special mission. We were told that the Special Forces camp at Kham Duc was being overrun by a superior North Vietnamese force. And we were supposed to help with the evacuation of Kham Duc because it was being overrun. But when we checked in with the Airborne Command Post, they told us to go down to the southwest of the field and orbit, and they would call us when they were ready for us because they had several airplanes in front of us. So we did. The first C-130 that went in had all four of its engines shot out while he was on the final approach. The second airplane took on a load of 200 persons, and right after takeoff, they were shot down, and all on board were lost. The third airplane landed. A few survivors got on board. Then the transport came under heavy attack from all sides, and he took off and left 3 combat controllers on the ground. He reported to the Airborne Command Post that he had picked up the last of the survivors. Airborne Command Post called the fighters and says, "Okay, fighters, you go in and destroy the camp so that whatever's there can't fall into the hands of the enemy." So they were going in to do that when the pilot called and said, no, he had just left 3 men combat control team off the airplane. By this time, it's getting pretty dark, and thunderclouds all over the place, and the weather was really deteriorating badly. The Airborne Command Post called and asked if there was anyone in the vicinity that could go in and take those guys out. And I was looking out the window, and I knew exactly where they were. So we called and said, "Roger, we're going in." From 9,000 feet, I started a extremely steep landing approach. My airspeed was right at the maximum for that configuration. The rate of descent had hit the limit on the instrument, so I don't know how fast we were going down. From 9,000 feet, I lost all of that altitude in a 270-degree turn. I rolled out on the final approach just about 1,000 feet from the end of the runway, and was able to touch down within the first 100 feet of the runway. So I was the luckiest guy in the world. I was able to stop that airplane exactly opposite the 3 guys that were in the ditch. They started running out toward the airplane, and as they're getting on board, I'm looking back, and the co-pilot called out, "Oh my God, look at that!" And a 122 millimeter rocket had been fired directly toward the airplane, and it's skidded down the runway and broke in half and stopped right immediately in front of the nose wheel of the airplane. I mean, really, really close. It didn't go off. So, again, I was the luckiest guy in the world, I guess. Well, when the loadmaster called that they're all on board, I took off in the opposite direction. And as I was taking off, automatic weapons and small arms fire was directed in front of me from both sides of the runway. We got off the ground safely, and really, there were two miracles there that afternoon. One is that you were able to get in and to get out safely, and the other one is there was not a single bullet hole in your airplane.
Well, I don't know how much such heroism was appreciated by the average American today or even at the time. Certainly our top military and especially political leaders failed to exercise such self-sacrifice. As I said, General Abrams, who was the chief of General Westmoreland's Operations Center, termed it a disaster. At Kham Duc, in that 3-day interval, 25 Americans had been killed and nearly 100 wounded, and there were several hundred Vietnamese casualties. 7 U.S. aircraft and all the camp's heavy military and engineering equipment were lost. American commanders had vacillated between reinforcing the camp and evacuating it, finally opting for evacuation under the worst possible circumstances. Command, control, and communications had been confused and often ineffective. General Abrams wrote that it was an ugly defeat, and I expect some repercussions. Unfortunately, the repercussions were few. General Abrams angrily ordered I Corps commanders to review their command, control, communications, and planning so that when your command is confronted with a similar imminent problem, appropriate action would be taken so that we would not lose another camp. The general's expression of unhappiness, however, was confined to top-secret messages. No heads rolled, no investigations were launched. Saigon and Washington remained unruffled, barely concerned. The news media, preoccupied with the communist attacks in Saigon and the peace negotiations in Paris, paid little attention. In a war in which the distinction between success and failure, victory and defeat had long been blurred, even an unequivocal debacle like Kham Duc could be obfuscated, obscured, and ignored. I have to say this. In the wake of heroism like that of Lt.Col Jackson and so many others, those who were awarded the Medal of Honor and the hundreds of thousands who weren't awarded the Medal of Honor, the behavior of our leaders at that point in 1968 is disgraceful, and it's one of the low points in American military history. Well, I'm going to close on that note. I want to thank my producer and IT genius, Sid Tepps. To you, Lt.Col Jackson, our gratitude is unlimited. We cannot begin to repay the debt we owe you.
You can be anything you want to. It's a matter of your choice. And one of the things that was taught to me by my mother and the minister was that regardless, you always do the right thing. How can you tell what the right thing to do is? My philosophy is that of all the options that you have available, the one you most would not like to do, that's probably the right thing to do. When you receive the Medal of Honor, your life changes, and it changes dramatically. I have to represent the thousands of Americans who have served their country. You have to make them proud of what you have done and what they have done. And that's a tough job, tell me, I'll tell you.